I created the 3 artifacts to give mankind a chance to join the gods. And they judged me a dangerous fool. And for daring to question the wishes of the other lords, I was cast out from the circle.
So the Space Hitler was God all along? Welcome to Wizardry 8, the sci-fi fantasy blobber where you create a party of nobodies and set out to stop Space Hitler from becoming God by becoming gods first, all while robbing banks, stumbling upon orgies, and setting off nukes in the process. I assume if you're watching this review, you have likely watched my Might and Magic reviews, because that's how I got to playing Wizardry myself. I was out of the non-grid based installments in the series and was looking for something similar, and Wizardry 8 turned out to be the closest thing. Therefore, throughout the video, I'll be comparing these games because of the plentiful similarities. First things first, Wizardry 8 was developed by Sirtech Canada and released in 2001, and later re-released on Steam and GOG by Night Dive Studios in 2013. Turns out, similar to Might and Magic trilogy I had reviewed, Wizardry 8 is also the last part of a trilogy, except the previous installments in the series look a bit too archaic even for me, and the later ones, well, the IP got sold to people who would turn the series into anime. Anyway, my first impressions starting the game were great. There was a ton of options for party creation with around 36 unique voices to choose from, for characters too. The voice acting in the game is great, by the way.
Alright, but don't expect me to waste my time yakking.
The combat being turn-based felt more tactical than the one in Might and Magic games, and the whole game just felt a bit more focused. It actually felt like I was following a one big story thread throughout the whole game, with even the side activities being somehow related to it. While in Might and Magic I often felt like I was just going to random places, doing random things, and every once in a while something related to the main plot would happen. I like the change. In the beginning, at least. Before I get ahead of myself, let's talk more in detail about the party creation, since that's the first thing you do. There seems to be an option to import a party from the previous game, which is kinda cool, but I was making a fresh one. Now there are so many different races and classes, and it would take forever to describe all of them and their synergies in detail, so I'll tell what I've made. The game doesn't even hide that it prefers certain races being or not being certain classes, by giving extra or detracting starting stat points. But I disregarded that, because the game had a lot of anthropomorphic races. I just knew I had to make a full furry party. There are furry types for every taste. Catgirls, wolf boys, scalies, and ones with those dad bods. There are even races that aren't even available on the initial party creation, but more on that later. My first choice was a Felper, or in human language catboy, bard. Ever since I started maining a minstrel in Lord of the Rings Online, I have to try bard classes in every game just for the memes. And to my immense joy, bard is amazing in Wizardry 8. He can use his music to cause serious buffs and debuffs, which are extremely important in this game, making enemies attack each other and such. Bagpipes? Those are great AoE weapons, so don't talk shit about them. I also had this infernal horn which would cast nuclear strike that damages every enemy in a fight. That's pretty much the brown note.
Oh my god! Oh, I crapped my pants!
Music can also heal, so bards have spells for every occasion. After my experience with Might and Magic games, I knew that a healer will likely be essential in this game too. And I was correct. My second character was a dwarven priest named Baldy. I just had to get a dwarf, I love him. And Baldy's face is really furry too, so he fit in no problem. Priests focus on divine and mental magic, while still being able to cast elemental magic. So it made for a great spellcaster overall. Also towards the endgame, they can get a spell which is pretty much a prayer that insta-kills everyone on the battlefield, so the healer of the party also becomes the best damage dealer with the power of piety. My third dude was the tank, a Dracon Lord, and Lord is one of those several paladin-like classes that combine a fighter and a healer. The guy was boring, never got him good at spellcasting, but he could take plenty of punches. My fourth character was another tank spellcaster hybrid, but one that I found a lot more interesting, a lizard lady Valkyrie. Valkyrie in my opinion is a gender-locked class done right, and I like how it works too. It's a fighter that focuses on using spears. More games should have spears, they're great. Valkyries can also cast all sorts of spells and avoid death once per combat, making them both great tanks and damage dealers. Next I had a Ravulf, a wolf dude ranger. That's pretty self-explanatory. Ranger is the bow shooting guy that is also good at scouting. I found ranged combat a lot less useful in Wizardry than in Might and Magic, but later on in the game the ranger began one-shotting occasionally, so that was neat. Lastly, I got another cat in my party, a feisty samurai lady. Samurais focus on doing a ton of damage in short bursts and can use specific gear meant only for them. Speaking of gear, it feels like there aren't that many different armor and weapon pieces like in some other games, but all of the classes, some races and sometimes genders have items specific to them. After just finishing the game, I'm already curious to see how the more specialized classes like ninja, psionic or gadgeteer work like. But yeah, my party was pretty physical. I just find messing with spells a bit confusing in games like this, and it certainly is a bit tricky knowing what spells and how you need to get them on first playthrough. I also liked how the setting being a combination of fantasy and sci-fi allows a mix of different cultures and tropes when it comes to the class selection. It just wouldn't make sense in many other games, but here it does. I start the game with my spaceship crashing near a monastery, which is generally pretty chill, but it also has one of the worst fights in the game. There is this giant bug named Gregor. Go home, Kafka, what are you doing in my Unhinged video game? And that bastard is tough. At that point the player's party is still pretty weak, has no cool gear or spells, and that thing just butchers dudes. The problem is, healing in this game is tricky. If someone dies, it's expensive to get them resurrected. You either need a lot of money or a high level healer. In the beginning, neither is available. So if anyone dies, they die. I had to reload a ton of times as I was running out of healing items and kept dying. I tried running past the thing, unsuccessfully. Eventually I managed to get by with only one casualty. My healer, Zbigniew Boldy. Good night, sweet prince. But this is where another cool mechanic kicks in. The party isn't set in stone after the initial creation. You can change classes and even entire characters. The only downside is that the new guys would be lacking in experience. Wizardry also has the Skyrim-like thing where skills improve while doing things.
Morning. How much is this?
149, sir.
I've got 50p. Fuck you, bastard.
So actual experience matters a lot. It was just the beginning of the game, so I laid Baldy to rest and recruited his son instead, Zbigniew II, aka Beardo. He might have also been bald, but he's a cool kid and is wearing a hood, so you can never know. After getting out of the monastery and moving to the city of Arnica, I also found out that there are also recruitable characters, all of them useful in some way, all having unique voice lines and quests tied to them. All of them were pretty interesting characters. In the beginning, having extra party members also helps a lot. The only problem is that each of them refuses to go to some specific areas. But essentially they're fully fledged party members. They have all the same functionalities as the player created ones. Another discovery upon entering the city was that nowhere in this game is safe. Whenever you travel anywhere in this game, you get harassed by enemies every 5 steps. I'm not even exaggerating. Town areas are no better. There are random enemy patrols there too. Maybe 80% of the game is just fighting. And while I like the combat system at first, it's very slow. Nowadays it is insane playing the game without the speed increasing mod. And even then, the combat is still slow. The bigger fights can easily take tens of minutes each. And most of fights is just clicking up a couple of buttons and then waiting a couple of eternities until the turn plays out. Rinse and repeat. Also, remember how I said buffs and debuffs are really powerful in this game? Well, turns out that enemies can cast all the same spells on you as you can on them.
I have an affliction.
So some status effects can be devastating. Actually, some enemies can cause some status effects that the player does not. Like war, for example.
Like someone's gone. Means more room for me.
This game is brutal, even on the novice difficulty setting. Because of it, even while enjoying the game, I dreaded playing it after getting a bit deeper, because with its slow pace and unforgiving difficulty, it felt like a chore. 20 hours in, I felt like I had made some serious progress and decided to check how long the game is in total, thinking I was nearing the end. How naive I was. Not only the game is really slow and difficult, it's also really long. That broke me a little. I knew I didn't have that much time to spare, so I'll let you in on a little secret that I did. I got a cheat engine and played the second half of the game with the God mode on. And know what? The game still did not turn easy. You see, even if my health couldn't be knocked down, I could still be insta-killed, and I was still susceptible to debuffs that could make the already slow combat several times slower. And the combat in this game doesn't only depend on doing more damage faster than enemies. Combat in Wizardry 8 is also a war of nutrition. Casting spells, that not only requires mana, which I never run out of, but also points in every school of magic that limits the amount of spells a character can cast before resting. And that's the easier bit. There's also stamina, which is required for almost every single action. Sprinting, hitting, playing musical instruments, you name it. You run out of stamina, you pass out and cannot do anything. Taking a hit also drains stamina, and if an enemy is doing AoE attacks, you're at risk of having your entire party passed out. So even with God mode on, I could easily get into this limbo state where I cannot die, but I also cannot win and exit the fight. And if the enemy is way higher level than me, I would just miss the great majority of my attacks, so I would still need to grind. Wizardry 8, ladies and gentlemen.
You do not speak the truth!
It can feel like the game actually doubles down when it gets difficult. For example, there is the underwater section in the game where most companions refuse to go, so that's several party members less. Then you also need diving gear, which replaces an accessory slot, making the entire party a bit weaker. Then on top of it, that part has one of the most insane fights in the game. You need to defeat what is pretty much the Loch Ness monster, and it's enormous. I'm not even surprised that I've heard my party members laugh hysterically plenty of times. The madness transcends reality. Even something as simple as items can be treacherous. Some of them could be cursed, meaning that you cannot take them off, like a hat with super glue inside. The same hat can also be straight up bad and take away 20 IQ from the wearer or constantly drain health. Some items are actually pretty hilarious. For example, you can use duct tape on an enemy to immobilize them. Also, since I'm comparing this to Might and Magic anyway, you know how it would incorporate sci-fi elements in the endings and give the player guns? Wizardry 8 does the same, but way better in my opinion. At first it felt odd to me that the nice fantasy setting of Might and Magic was dirtied with the sci-fi stuff, but I grew to like that kind of thing. It makes sense that a primitive civilization would consider sci-fi tech magic, and that during space travels some of the encountered civilizations would be medieval. Instead of making it a plot twist, Wizardry 8 embraces that idea. It's more of a sci-fi game with fantasy elements, really. There are spaceships straight from the get-go, and a whole class dedicated to gadgets. The gun skill is actually useful for once, although it's always amusing having a primitive fighter shoot modern guns.
Alright, Gordon, your suit should keep you comfortable through all this. The specimen will be delivered to you in a few moments.
Unfortunately, even with all the space tech, traveling in this game is slow, and mostly by foot. There are just a couple of teleporters in the whole game, and they're not easily accessible. There is a waypoint spell eventually, but you can only set one waypoint, and you have to walk there manually first to set it. You have to know that you'll need to return there, but honestly you need to go back and forth throughout the whole map a lot in the game. It's fairly interesting that the World map is mostly circular in this game. Most of the zones make up a single big loop. After spending some time in them, the game's world stops looking so big anymore. Most individual zones seem smaller than the ones in Might and Magic, but traversing them is hell. It's slow, and there are numerous groups of enemies that will never give up following you upon noticing you. You'll have to fight a lot, wherever you go. So just getting from point A to point B can take an hour or so sometimes. And in some tighter spaces with a lot of NPCs, it can become infuriating. Please, just let me go through. That's the gist of the gameplay. What's the plot like then? What's even the point of this suffering? Well, like I mentioned before, there is this big bad guy, the Dark Savant, who is out to collect 3 relics that would allow him to become a god. He ends up at the planet of Dominus, where the main gang that has decided to step up and stop the bad guy follows him. Because of the amount of locations, factions and characters, at first the plot can seem a bit confusing, but the further I went, the more simple it felt. Some side plots aside, the main goal of the game is to collect the relics before Dark Savant and become god first. It's like that from the very beginning to the very end. It can feel even lacking for a game of such length, but I can also appreciate it being more focused. Sometimes it gets ridiculous how many different stories people tend to cram into open world games, making the main story feel like a secondary thing. And most of the side plots have to deal with the tense relationships between the races living in Dominus. First, there are the Higardi, pretty much the humans. They're the dominant race of the planet and they're mostly neutral towards everyone. There are some smaller, neutral-ish races, like the bunny-like Trinis, who are pretty much tribal jungle gypsies, the Mook scientists, or the American-Italian mafia-like Ratkin.
Barlon just sent word that it's time for you to pay your regular, service fees.
Then there are the Raypaks, the horny gorilla-like threat to the whole planet. They know nothing but war, and they've made an alliance with the Dark Savant to conquer the planet. Then there are also Umpani, the absurdly stereotypical rhino soldiers, and the spider-slug hybrid Strang, which are at war with each other. The player has the option to side with one of them and destroy the other. Or alternatively, if you have several dozens of extra hours, you can play double agent, like I have, and get a prettier outcome by finding out that both the Umpani and the Trang hate Dark Savant more than each other, and could make an alliance to fight a common enemy. By the way, you can recruit people from all these races you encounter to your party. The presentation of the game certainly feels competent. While the environments look simplistic by today's standards, I found the visuals charming, and completely serviceable. Audio design is where the game really shines though. There would be some horrible audio mixing, but the music would be pretty memorable, and I absolutely adore the voice acting.
General Yamir, I have a few words for you. Everything I have been through could have been prevented if they had listened to your orders, sir.
I felt like I was actually attached to every single of my party members. Aside from just the generic lines, they would also have some quest-related dialogue and stuff. I would generally miss recruitable characters when I'd have to let them go. It's just sometimes funny how dialogues could be cut off by various actions.
Give me a knife and I will prick.
Life forms exterminated.
The game also has one of those funky dialogue systems where you can type in anything you want to talk about. There's a lot of dialogue and all of it is voiced. That's brilliant. I absolutely cannot hear the combat theme anymore though. Also, you know what's great? No matter what you do, enemies always explode into gore upon death, even if you just shoot them with an arrow or play with the bagpipes. Also, there's a lot of naked boobs and nipples in the game, and seeing how the remake of Garage Bad Dream Adventure was pulled from Google Play, I'd say it's very based, and I've never supported the free the nip movement more, in the media at least. Most importantly, even if the game doesn't value players' time much, it does value agency. The game isn't completely unfocused, but it doesn't do any hand-holding whatsoever. Most of the progress in the story is made through exploration and fairly tricky detective work, and while some things may have oddly specific solutions, some have multiple ways to be solved. Some are able to be solved even with sequence breaking, like one of the last things I've experienced in the game. When I got to the Rapax castle, I had the option to become their Templar, so they wouldn't be hostile. I killed their Master Lady instead. But to get to the final zone, I needed to get to a portal that required me to go through the initiation ritual first. Turns out the ritual involved me getting laid with the said lady, but she was already dead. Yet, it still happened somehow, and minutes later, in the next zone, I already met my grown-up daughter that was born from a dead lady that I involuntarily fucked. Wait, that came out very wrong. Met child today.
No more affairs with
Also, that sequence involves so many enemies that the entire game slowed down to a PowerPoint presentation frame rate. Guess it makes sense why every time you turn off the game it shows an ad for an obviously superior 2001 PC. Overall, I'd say I'm glad I played through Wizardry 8, even if it did feel like torture a lot of the time. It is a game that doesn't respect players' time. It doesn't need to be as long and tedious as it is, because half the game is just random combat encounters that have nothing to do with anything. Yet, it was a neat alternative to Might and Magic to me, and it feels like this is what the sequel could have been if it was good, instead of the jank we've got. It's the better early 2000s fully 3D blobber when compared to Might and Magic 9. It's also the only other decent first-person party-based RPG that does not have grid-based movement, and I'm not a big fan of grid-based movement at all. Anyway, if for some reason you're actually curious to try out Wizardry 8 for yourself, I have a little checklist for you to keep your suffering to a minimum. 1. Install the speed mod. The game is slow, and it's pretty much unbearable without it. 2. Have a healer in your party. That's crucial. 3. Have someone who can defend your party from debuffs. I realized I didn't around 30 hours in, and it was extremely painful. 3.1. Don't underestimate buffs and debuffs. Protecting yourself and controlling crowd is crucial. 4. Have someone to pick locks. I instinctively knew that would be important after the trapped party wiping chests of Might and Magic. I didn't feel like traps or locks were that important for the most part in Wizardry, but being able to unlock doors in the late game is extremely helpful. 5. Invest points in critical strike and other skills that allow insta-killing. They're great. Have fun. Don't let the furries kick your ass too much. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video.